Things have moved fast in the past 24, 48, 72 hours. At the beginning of the week, we had a warning from the United States and Britain that Russian invasion could be launched as early as Wednesday, which is today. There followed a scramble of Western embassies to leave Kiev. Even the Americans have gone to Lviv, which is a city in Western Ukraine, as a kind of almost government in exile, or capital in exile being set up there. The Americans even pulled out the wires in their embassy and started destroying sensitive documents and things. The British ambassador has stayed in Kiev, showing a little bit of backbone, however. So it's pretty clear the West was spooked, really genuinely scared. And yet, last night, when a lot of people felt like an attack might happen, nothing materialized. The Russians have said, why are you panicking? We're sending our troops home. The latest today is that the Americans, and indeed President Zelensky just told the BBC about half an hour ago, we don't see any drawdown yet. The troops are still there. So we'll believe what the Russians say when they see it. That's pretty much where we are.
I think it's very important to say that this week started on an optimistic note when Vladimir Putin received both Russia's foreign and defense ministers and talked to them about Russia's security demands, which is something that got us to the essentially threat of war. And he also ordered a partial pullback of troops. But it's also important to say that we still haven't seen much on the ground in terms of the pullback. We saw some footage released by the Russian Defense Ministry showing equipment and troops moving away from Crimea. It's not clear how many of the troops are moving and when they're going. So we're still actually waiting to see any tangible results on the ground, because this buildup that really got people worried from the start. We can talk about Western intelligence later, Western intelligence that presented various doomsday scenarios that talked about an imminent invasion, but the facts are still there. There's an unusually high number of troops and weaponry close to Ukraine, on the Russian territory, and the most recent satellite images we saw still shows that it is pretty much there. Obviously, there's a sigh of relief this morning that the doomsday scenario of an invasion, as some British tabloids pointed out, never happened. But we see there were still some concerning signs last night about cyber attacks.
Just to set up the context, so it was the Sun and the Mirror yesterday ran very similar stories citing an anonymous American intelligence official saying invasion starts tonight. One of them said 1 a.m., one of them said 3 a.m. Don't know. So everyone was on edge, to be honest. And then suddenly, in the evening, these denial of service attacks started hitting two of Ukraine's biggest banks, Privat Bank and Oshad Bank, really important. They also hit the Defense Ministry website, the Secret Security Service website, the Armed Forces website, the Interior Ministry. Now, it did send a few jitters around Kiev, I must say. And I was getting a couple of messages saying, jokingly saying, like, guys, it begins, because everybody anticipates that the first move in an invasion isn't going to be the rockets landing, it's going to be the electronic disruption. However, it seems to have been actually relatively mild. So it seems like it was denial of service attacks, which, kind of basically took down the banks temporarily, or their websites, and attacked websites. Servers don't seem to have been hacked, and the kind of really serious kind of disruption of infrastructure that you'd expect presaging an invasion didn't occur. So yeah, it looked to me like an attempt to kind of rattle people's cages. Frankly, I think it succeeded. Natasha, there's a question here from Phil about Maskerovka, or a comment about Maskerovka. I think it's worth laying that out. I mean, I personally have a bit of an aversion to using that, because I don't really think that the.
Do you want to explain to people what it is? I think even
I thought you might be playing. Well,
I'll tell you what.
How about we do it like this? I will explain it as a kind of rather rubbish non-native Russian speaker, and then you see it. Tell me if we got it wrong. So, as I understand, Maskarovka is Russian word, military doctrine for deception. And it tends to get trotted out in lots of analyses. Whenever the Russians do something sneaking, people say, aha, Maskarovka. I'm a little bit allergic to that because I really don't think that the Russians have a monopoly on military deception, or trying to convince your enemy you're doing something you're not. I do think that the success of their recent operations, the way they suddenly appeared in Crimea, the way they ran their covert operation in Donbass in 2014, how they appeared in Syria before anyone really knew they were there in 2015, has kind of put the wind up people a bit about the Russians being extremely devious about that. I personally am not sure that it is an especially Russian thing, but Natasha, if I got that right.
I think that it's an important question to talk about here is I think this is something that got people in Russia very skeptical about the idea of invasion scheduled for Wednesday 3 a.m. Because what we have seen throughout Putin's 20 years in power is that he likes to catch people by surprise. No one expected the annexation in Crimea in 2014. No one expected Russia to send troops for crucial battles in eastern Ukraine in 14-15. So it's not the message, I guess, it's very important to press is that the threat is not eliminated. The fact that the invasion didn't happen today, or that Putin said yesterday, quote, we don't want a war, doesn't mean that everyone should go home and we're not going to see any hostilities or any military aggression in Ukraine. And Putin's press conference with the visiting German chancellor yesterday actually was quite telling. He had a couple of opportunities to reassure the world and Russians that there's not going to be any war. And when he was asked about what he was going to do, what the plan was, he said, quote, "We're going to act according to the plan, but it's not just up to us. We will react to what is happening around," which obviously leaves the Kremlin a lot of room of maneuvering and what to do.
And it's a veiled threat as well there, isn't there? And I think you make very good points there, which is that whether or not we think Maskarovka is a particularly uniquely Russian trait that they're uniquely good at, and I think everybody is aware of this government's record, and I think that is why nobody is taking these claims of a withdrawal at face value, really. We've seen it from everybody, from Joe Biden last night, Zelensky today. I think Ben Wallace was speaking also today. The message is we will believe it when we see it.
But
also I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important to add that we've been seeing this build up for weeks and months, and all of those troops and weaponry, it didn't end up on the border overnight. It's not something it's not a cargo that you can fly in and take out the following night. So if the Kremlin is serious about withdrawing all of the troops, if they were to start doing it tonight or last night, it will take them weeks. So we need to see and wait. There was a quite good question I saw, I think, which maybe is worth discussing right now, about journalism. And I can totally understand it from the reader's point of view when they get bombarded with the headlines, "The invasion is imminent, invasion on Wednesday." Roland, how would you react to that? I mean, how would people feel? And is it okay for us to publish it? Can you give any explanation, why we're talking about this imminent invasion while it hasn't happened yet, obviously?
Why are we talking about it while it hasn't happened? I mean, we're talking about it because it looked like it was going to happen. And I think, okay, here's my advice to anyone watching this. If anybody tells you, no, it's definitely not going to be an invasion. I mean, it's obvious, like it's absolutely doesn't make any sense. It's not the way Putin thinks. It's illogical. I wouldn't trust that person. And if someone tells you that this is definitely going to happen. I mean, look, you can't move that amount of force. Putin can't back down without losing face. I wouldn't trust that person either. The truth is, we just don't know. So, I mean, we're following it because something has definitely rattled Western government. I mean, seriously rattled Western governments. No matter how skeptical we are about
not just Western
anonymous.
governments. I saw the other morning that India was evacuating its diplomatic staff from here.
Yeah. So it's not just the West. There's lots of governments are spooked, and intelligence is clearly being shared, which is really alarming. And I think if you just have to look at the tone of President Biden's address last night, you have to look at their actions. The fact they started delivering weapons, the fact they have withdrawn embassies from Kiev. Right? These are the actions of people who are worried. And by the way, I know we've spoken a lot about the disconnect between Western apparent panic and in Kiev. Well, yeah, the Ukrainians have tried to keep a lid on this because they're very, very aware of the damage that public panic could do, and they consider that is one of Vladimir Putin's objectives, to spread panic and destabilize the country. But listen, like, I'm in touch with soldiers on the front line. All leave has been cancelled. Right? They were sitting in their trenches last night, pretty damn worried. Kind of, is this it? There are definitely grounds to believe that this was going to happen. We simply don't know. Was it all a bluff on Putin's part? I don't know. I mean, look, let's go back to what we think Putin. This is what I think the plan is. The Russian game. I think the objective is basic. I think. Well, who knows? It's to force concessions on the Western Ukraine. It's to force concessions that the Western Ukraine simply do not want to make, especially around the Minsk agreements. That's a concession that the Ukrainians fear would cause, a political crisis inside the country and would fatally undermine their sovereignty. And the point is to pressure them into doing that. If you can do that without actually going to war and running these huge risks, then fine. Make it look like you're going to attack, force Macron and Scholz and whoever else to fly to Moscow and try and broker something and hope that the West can pressure the Ukrainians into making those concessions. Fine. I think for that reason, we are definitely not out of the woods here because do you see what Putin's comments at that press conference in the Kremlin with Olaf Scholz yesterday, they kind of boiled down to, all right, let's keep talking, but the cost of de-escalation is, delivering on our demands. And if those demands are not delivered on, the implicit threat remains there. That quote you cited just earlier, it's not up to us. Who knows how it will develop? It's not up to us.
Yeah. Which brings us nicely to a question from Stephen, who is asking, if the current crisis comes down and the situation de-escalates, then what? Unless NATO provides the guarantees Putin is seeking, the underlying problem doesn't go away. So I guess, it brings us to the point of, so Putin may be withdrawing or pulling back some of the troops. Okay, maybe there is not going to be any talk about an imminent invasion. How do you see, Roland, from the Ukrainian side, do you see that the Ukrainian government is willing to make any compromises, willing to make any steps that could lower the risk of the Kremlin getting completely bonkers and losing its patience?
Losing its patience. It's a great question. And it is a question I've been asking Ukrainian officials while I've been in Kiev. So what could Ukraine deliver on? They really don't want to deliver on the Minsk agreements. And there's all kinds of things we could debate about them. The basic reason is, and I'm sure most people watching this is familiar with it, the Minsk agreements were signed to stop the fighting in 2015 when basically the Russians had won. Right? It was a treaty where the Ukraine had to give concessions in order for the Russians not to wipe out a Ukrainian army. Maybe they are going to have to concede to it actually, but maybe there's a way of repackaging it. So one idea I've heard is like, okay, we stop calling it Minsk because that's toxic. Maybe we go to Istanbul and Erdogan negotiate something and we'll call it the Istanbul process or something like that. Or maybe, Zelensky talked about
rebranded.
No, rebranded. This is exactly the term that I've heard. Rebranded. You saw Zelensky appeal to Nataliya Bennett in Israel. I mean, that actually that's an interesting option. I mean, Israel is a country, you know, with strong links to both sides, and it is generally considered neutral territory. That'd be quite interesting, actually. Maybe it'll be the
Also,
Jerusalem talks.
with a long-standing frozen conflict, I don't think there's any other way to describe
Yeah,
it.
exactly. You know, I mean, no strangers to that kind of thing. So, you know, find a different venue, rename it, give it a really long implementation period, change some things, try and make it more palatable to the Ukrainian public. Maybe, so one idea I've heard is you put in an international component, maybe not like literally peacekeepers, but I don't know, an interim administration that would oversee the organization of elections, which wouldn't happen for years. You'd have a long-term, something that is going to give the Ukrainian public some kind of reassurance that they're not sacrificing sovereignty to Moscow, basically. The important word is, the person I spoke to said, you know, even if that is a false hope. And even if you did that, you would still have trouble getting it through the Rada, and you would still face, you know, a serious problem with public unrest. Another option, I mean, it's not something Ukraine could deliver on overnight. It is written into the constitution, but maybe an arrangement could be where. I mean, we saw Olaf Scholz said in Moscow last night, you know, everybody understands Ukraine isn't getting into NATO soon, so why don't we just, you know, kind of find a way for everyone to understand that and back away from this? That's a concession. And the other thing, and this may be wild thinking, all right, but you saw the State Duma voted on, you know, this appeal to recognize the separatist republics in the east, right? That would kill Minsk, and in actual fact, that would be a real gift to Ukraine, and it would be a real gift to the West. Minsk would be over. And the Ukrainians could also say, look, we're victims. However, you know, they're given the security. So that threat to their sovereignty is kind of taken away. Neither Russia nor Kiev really want responsibility for Donbass. So in effect, Russia would kind of be, that would almost be, you could see it as a concession from the Russian side. So the Ukrainians, in return, you know, euthanize the NATO bid. Is that a quid pro quo? Maybe wild thinking, all right, but you know, I'd be surprised if these ideas aren't being kicked around.
I would also, I think it's very important to add why Russia wants Minsk to be implemented. I saw a couple of questions around, you know, but it's the concessions from Russia's side. Russia is not annexing eastern Ukraine as it has annexed Crimea. I think from the very start, objectives were quite different for Russia in Crimea and in Donbass. Crimea has had a primarily Russian-speaking population, which in fact welcomed the annexation. In Donbass, the demographics is quite different. And in some many ways, and this is an opinion that's widely circulated, Russia would benefit more from Donbass being part of Ukraine, but being controlled by Russia, rather than annexing it and bankrolling this region that in the past years fell into complete disrepair. Its economy is in tatters. It used to be an industrial heartland, but now it's not about Donbass feeding the rest of Ukraine as it used to be described, but quite the other way around. So if Kiev was to implement the Minsk agreements tomorrow, the way they were formulated, the way they were laid out, it would essentially leave a landmine underneath Ukraine's sovereignty. So Russia wouldn't need to annex it. It would be sort of better for the Kremlin in that sense. So yeah, I think it's very important to point this out. There was a
hold on, I just want to take this one from Marco. It says, do you not think the whole invasion hype was a smokescreen in order to then gain credit that we made them back down? No, I don't. I think the invasion scare is genuine. I think Vladimir Putin definitely intended to frighten them. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, politicians will be politicians. There'll be credit taken for this. But it's a good point, because this is going to be spun two ways. And given the fact we've got, it's perfectly possible. The West is going to say, we showed unity, we called them out, we revealed their plans, and Putin backed off. And he wasn't expecting that, and he's bottled it, right? And the West and the Russians are going to say, well, you know, every Western leader you care to name has come scurrying to Moscow. they have agreed finally to speak to us about our security concerns in NATO, which for years they were dismissing. We are getting some kind of progress on Minsk, etc., etc. And we've, managed to inflict not inconsiderable damage on the Ukrainian economy. So thank you very much. And how hysterical you were thinking we were going to do that. Both sides are going to be claiming some kind of victory out of this. And I'm going to leave it to the historians who
Russia already have. We saw first.
Yes,
we saw
exactly.
a statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman who posted this sort of proclamation on her social media saying the 15th, right, the 15th of February. This is the day that Russia won. This is the day the West was humiliated because the invasion never happened. And her boss, Minister Sergei Lavrov, also had his "I told you so" moment, in a little bit in a more polite and toned down tone, but to them it sort of supported their narrative of Western governments managing Western media and telling them what to say, and obviously whipping up the friends of something that is not happening. I think also I don't think we mentioned that. It's important to say that the military exercises, the way the Kremlin describes them at the Ukrainian border, they were never announced. There was never an announcement that Russia was sending XYZ amount of troops to Ukraine, what they were going to do, what the combat tasks were. And I think it's very important to say that there are international documents, including the Vienna Convention, that essentially laid some groundwork for countries to cooperate in terms of military exercises and put some trust-building measures in place. So, for example, if you're Liechtenstein and if you want to hold military drills, if you want to use 100,000 troops, you should be informing other countries of your plans. And other countries have the right.
Liechtenstein has 100,000 troops. Be interesting.
Yeah, if they decided to. So this is what we didn't see. Russia never announced military exercises. What we heard on Monday was Russia was asking, Russia's defense minister suggested to end military drills that were never announced. So obviously that is of course quite worrying. And
I think
I'm sure Roland saw that Ukraine's foreign minister, actually on the weekend, just when the invasion date was announced, he officially used this Vienna Convention mechanism, and the Ukraine went to Russia and asked for information about those exercises, and Russia completely stonewalled those demands. And I think we saw and Russia's envoy to EU, Chizhov, say that they're not going to engage, that Russia has the right to do whatever it wants on its territory, which is fine as rhetoric, and no one is going to argue with that. But there are international agreements in place that actually says, no, you can't do that. And the Kremlin definitely hasn't respected that.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's just on the armchair generalship thing. So Tim asks, two main goals of Putin seem to me to be securing the land bridge to Donbass, from Donbass to Crimea via Mariupol, and opening Nord Stream 2. The rest of deployments north of Kiev and west of Kharkiv are deceptions to stop Ukraine concentrating forces in the south. What do we think about that? Every journalist has been asking everyone they know about what the plan is. I've heard many different theories in Kiev from different Ukrainian officials. I've heard three competing and entirely mutually exclusive theories. One was right. Well, I mean, Russia doesn't really have the forces for a full invasion, but they could take Kiev. So they're gonna run in from Belarus. They're gonna take Kiev. Everything else is a deception. Okay. Another one said to me, right, it's the east. They're going to try and take the rest of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. Everything else is a deception. Look for the east. It's going to be a limited operation there. And a third person said, no. It's the south. It's the only thing that makes sense. It's the land bridge. It's seizing Odessa. It's cutting us off from the coast. Only thing that makes sense from Vladimir Putin's point of view. I've heard all of these, all delivered by well-connected, intelligent, convincing people. And I, at the time you hear it, you find it impossible to kind of go, yeah, but you think, well, gosh. Gosh, that's convincing. Yeah, I buy that. So I don't know. Natasha, do you think this will have any implications for other disputes such as the Baltic states? Asks Stephen.
Yeah, I would actually merge it with another question, which was about Belarus, whether Russia's John was asking, will the Ukraine crisis lead to Belarus joining the Russian Federation? Um, uh, Obviously, as we talked about maskirovka earlier, about this sort of
Misdirection. We call it that.
mythological Russian way of distracting people and like doing something else while no one is looking. Um, uh, Part of the warmongering is the activities that we've been seeing in Belarus. The military drills that Russian troops are holding in Belarus as we speak are quite unprecedented. In terms of numbers of troops, we still haven't seen the official numbers of troops. But if you judge by reports from the Belarusian railway company, they have received 10 times as much train loads of weaponry compared to Russian-Belarusian exercises 8 months ago, which is quite a big difference.
Mm.
Obviously, there is a risk that we might see unpredictable events. Let me put it this way: in Belarus, while the world is not looking at Belarus, while all of the attention is focused on Ukraine, Belarus obviously is in a very vulnerable state right now. It's a country run by a dictator that claimed a landslide victory a year and a half ago, that has zero credibility in the West and inside the country, that keeps jailing people and going after any sign of discontent. And essentially, his only ally is Vladimir Putin, which is the reason why Belarus has allowed those unprecedented military drills that this country hasn't seen since its independence in 1991. So, with Belarus, all bets are off because Lukashenko has for years maneuvered quite skillfully between Russia and the West, trying to play one against the other. He doesn't have that leverage anymore. So there's a risk of things going unpredictable in Belarus, and I don't want to call it annexation of whatever. But Belarus is in a very vulnerable state. As far as the Baltic states go, to be honest, I don't think anyone thinks there's a threat to the Baltic states. First off, because Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are NATO members. And if anything were to happen to those countries, Article 5 of the NATO Charter will kick in, which means that armies of the NATO members would have to respond. If we look at Vladimir Putin's public statements, who has said on multiple occasions that he doesn't think Ukraine is a real country, that he thinks Ukrainians and Russians are the same people. We didn't see that kind of rhetoric about the Baltics. I think there's a clear distinction that between that, if we are being sort of realistic and cynical about it.
No, I think it's true, but it would. I mean, if you leave Russian troops in Belarus, which I think is quite, well within the realms of possibility that you get a semi-permanent Russian presence there. I mean, that also has implications for NATO and how.
Yes, and Sunday is the deadline for that, so we're gonna know very, very soon.
Yeah, exactly. So you would have NATO kind of thinking, oh well, the contingency plan. We don't think they will attack us because we're NATO, but you have to have contingency plans, and there's that, the Suwalki gap. This idea that a lightning Russian move to close the border between that little gap between Kaliningrad and Belarus, isolate the Baltics. Put an S-300 air defense unit on Gotland and close the airspace and crush them. Okay, nightmare scenarios, the kind of thing that people write paperback books about. But this is the kind of thing that NATO has to worry about, right? So that will be a headache. That will mean people are on edge and a distraction and a kind of constant threat, and that will create a bit more leverage. And which brings me back to a really important point about this. We did kind of see elements of what may have been a debate inside the Russian security and foreign policy kind of establishment, right? So in the past few months, kind of articles by Lukyanov and others, people like that. And one of them, and I've forgotten who wrote it, a very important person wrote an article, and basically arguing, look, we don't need a war, but we need a Cuban Missile Crisis, and that goes back to Vladimir Putin's comments. Was it in
And that's a
December when he said
comparison that has
we
been
need tensions?
widely
Right,
circulated in Russia.
right. We need to maintain tensions to get them to notice us and to pursue our agenda. We don't need a war, but we need to maintain agendas. That would be perfectly in line with that.
And Vladimir Putin said as much in December. In fact, he was meeting, I think he was meeting the Russian general staff, and he said, we've been maintaining those tensions. So there's no one is hiding that.
Yeah. In light of recent events, do you think there's a chance that Sweden and Finland joining NATO? Oh gosh, difficult to see, really. Yeah, I mean, definitely more of a chance than there was. I mean, those are countries that have always maintained that they have the option to join NATO should they wish. It would be obviously a big blow to Russian kind of strategic interests officially. On the other hand, what I think that's one of the kind of the implicit threats that has been leveled at Moscow, right? If you do this, Finland and Sweden are going to join NATO, and put that in your strategic interest pipe and smoke it. I wonder if that's a cost that the Russians are willing to bear in exchange for Ukraine.
This is, I think we should be wrapping up at this point. It's been, yeah, it's almost, we're almost running out of time here. Unless you want to have a closing remark or something.
I don't have any closing remarks. I'd say thank you very much for everybody who's tuned in, and any questions. We try our best to cover this very, very murky crisis, and it's always good to get questions directly from the readers. So keep it up, stay in touch, and we'll hope to do this. Again. I hope there's not an actual war that makes us do it, but
yes, exactly.
I like looking forward to it. And I just leave it to Natasha to work out how to turn this thing off, because I don't know.
Yes. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. I wish we had more time, but I would very much hope that we have covered pretty much all of it, and we would like to see you all again soon at some point.